Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast with Ollie Rock. Toney Jacobson is an IP partner at one of Silicon Valley's top law firms, Fenwick and West, where he's been practicing for the past 14 years. Toney focuses on IP-related issues and has worked with companies ranging in size from small startups and incubators like YC to Fortune 500 companies. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did, where I learn about Toney's background in STEM and learn more about his path to partnership. Hey, Toney, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited to be here.
You have a really impressive career with Fenwick and West, and you're coming up on your 14th year with them and fourth year as partners. So huge congrats on that.
Yeah, thanks. No, I appreciate it. It's been a wild ride.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm super excited to dive into your background, especially because you have a STEM bachelor's and a STEM master's, and I'm really curious about how you got to go into law and especially get to your current position as partner. But I'd love to start with an icebreaker first. So the question is, if you could do any other job and money and everything else was not a factor, what would it be and why?
Yeah, so skill is also not a factor.
Skill
Is
is
that
not a
right?
factor.
Yeah. I
Yes.
would play left field for the San Francisco Giants, and I would want to bat like second. So not the pressure of leadoff, but also not the big cleanup hitter, nothing like that. Just like a solid 280 hitter that maybe won two career Gold Gloves in left field. That's it. Small ask.
Love it. So I take it you're a huge Giants fan.
Yeah, I'm a pretty big Giants fan, but I actually grew up watching a little bit of the Mariners and a lot of the Cubs because I grew up in North Idaho, and there wasn't local baseball, but we did get WGN on cable TV, and they covered most Cubs games, especially back then. So it was before the ESPN and Apple TV deals with baseball, so it was fun to be able to watch Cubs games reliably. And then also like the Mariners were kind of the quote unquote local team, even though they were several hundred miles away. Um, One nice thing about the Mariners is they, in their early kind of 90s days, like back when Randy Johnson was pitching, they just had this like incredible cast of players. Like Griffey came up in the 90s. A-Rod was there for a while. They had this bald guy who I really admired because all the men in my family are bald, including me, named Jay Buhner, who was just a monster behind the plate. So it was fun watching them. But yeah, I was a Cubs fan before then. I know we're getting totally off base here, but then when I moved to the Bay Area in 2004, I just sort of got sucked in immediately to the beauty of AT&T Park. It was called something else back then, Pac-Bell or something. And we started following the
Yeah.
Giants as they were kind of ascending into their three World Series championships in 5 years.
That's awesome. Yeah. So just kind of going off of that, you mentioned that you're from Idaho, and you did your bachelor's in electrical engineering and mathematics at the University of Idaho. So I'd love to take it back to your time at Idaho at the university. What were you thinking of doing after graduating?
Yeah. So at the time, I didn't really know exactly what it was that I wanted to do, to be honest. Like I knew I wanted to be in engineering. I kind of had a sense that electrical engineering wasn't for me, which was unfortunate because that's where my major was. Um, the chip design and electronics design cycle was just really frustrating. It was like a 1 month of design to like 5 months of debugging, and the work wasn't very satisfying. It's just I knew almost immediately, like by my junior year at Idaho, which some people call the MIT of North Idaho, by the way. I knew that it was unlikely that I was going to have sort of like a long term career satisfaction in electrical engineering design. So I kind of explored ancillary fields, and one of my professors said, I know this guy who's a patent attorney, and he's really happy. He loves his life. It's like somewhat low stress as far as like legal jobs go. And I thought, hey, that sounds cool. So I talked to him, and sure enough, like you can kind of tell when you talk to people, like, hey, this isn't, uh, they say they like their job because they're trying to recruit you, or they say they like their company, but the smile doesn't quite reach their eyes. So you can kind of tell when somebody's not being totally candid with you about that. And as it turns out, uh, he legitimately seemed happy to be doing what he did. So I talked to him, and then I went back to my professor, and I talked to a couple other professors as well, and they all recommended at least going to grad school in order to sort of like I think the thinking was at the time, by having at least a master's degree, you were much more marketable on the legal market. So I decided to do that. I went to grad school. Note that to practice, to practice in front of the USPTO, you have to have one of a couple of degrees. There's like maybe 15 or 20 degrees, but they require that background. You could also test into it and take some coursework, but that's sort of the tougher option. It's much more natural to get one of these degrees in an engineering or science or computer science type field. And so, yeah, sure enough, I did my research and I realized, yeah, this field seems pretty cool. So I think I'll try it. And by the way, my story is not unique. Patent law is replete with burnouts from engineering, like just people that realize, hey, it kind of sucks to do circuit design, 10 hours a day for the rest of your life. So it's a pretty common story. And so, talking to other folks who had gone down that path and realizing, hey, I'm not weird. This is like not a totally unique situation that I'm in, and there is a path for people like me to still participate in engineering, at least from a distance, and to leverage my engineering background in a way that still makes me professionally successful, but gives me the satisfaction that I wasn't getting from like traditional design.
That's amazing. So you were sort of exposed to it during university, and then did you know you wanted to get your master's after that? I mean, I'm curious why you wouldn't just kind of go to law school if you knew that was something you wanted to do.
Yes, so I mean, like I mentioned, a couple of professors and then the attorney that I talked to, they all mentioned, hey, like get a master's degree. Like you're not going to regret it. To me, I kind of thought to myself, like, maybe maybe this school isn't for me, or maybe I had a bad set of professors. I didn't think that at the time, but maybe there's someone out there that could inspire me to enjoy the field that I've already dedicated so much time to, engineering. Uh, and so I thought, this is a chance to sort of prove to myself that, hey, maybe, if you're gonna like bow out of engineering, like you should be sure of it. And so it was a chance to prove that to myself, and that's what I did. So I
Wow.
liked it as well. Like it was right around the kind of mid 2000s when the processor wars had just heated up into overdrive, and people were just pumping out faster and hotter processors, and it was getting to the point where the silicon was melting. And it was obvious that this had a natural limit, like the physical limitations of the chip materials weren't going to allow us to just like pump faster and faster processors without like more efficient ways of eliminating heat. And so the solution there was to delve into multi-core design, and that was really the birth of the dual core, the quad core processor. And so I joined a lab, Professor Bevan Boss at the University of Davis. I joined his lab, and he was really focused on taking that to the absolute extreme. So we worked on a chip that, at the time, it was the second version of this chip, and it had 169 processors on it. And the thinking was,
Wow.
let's make each individual processor core much dumber, but let's make magic in how we route data through them. And so it's the kind of like the beauty of it was you could do these really complicated procedures, but because you had so many cores, you could sort of just route data through in a way that was uh, taking some of the load off of what the more comprehensive processors were requiring. And so, yeah, that was sort of the thinking behind that. In the end, obviously multi-core design is still here. It's still with us. It's what everybody does, from NVIDIA to Intel to AMD to ARM. And it never quite took advantage of the theory behind that massively multi-core chip. But in the end, we discovered some really cool things. And I'll say the portion of it that I designed was a specific chip that, for about a period of 5 months in 2006, was the world's fastest configurable FFT processor. And it was really cool. Like it felt cool to have, even if it was something super niche, to have the fastest at something. But then the Germans came out with
Wow.
a better chip, and the Germans took my title. So I'm still mad at them. So
And
that's where we
and
are.
that's amazing, Tony. So this was while you were a master's student at UC Davis, right?
Yeah, it was part of a lab that had a collaboration. I don't remember the specific details of it, but a collaboration with Intel. And so we had some great funding. They actually fabbed the chip. We got a bunch of great papers out of it, and Professor Boss is still very successful. So it was a cool time to be there.
That's amazing. So you were in UC Davis doing your master's from 2005 to 2007. And
Yes.
before that, you did some work at Sandia National Lab. So I'd love to hear what you were doing there as a control system engineer.
Yeah, so Sandia is a really great place to intern. They're very picky about, uh, you know, the folks they'll bring in, and they have to be for both security reasons and longevity reasons. But they've got a really great recruiting program that staffs. I think there was 100+ interns, summer interns there, all about kids our age. So it was really fun, right? It was people from all over the country. It's where I met my wife. It's where I met
Oh,
Jason, who you have previously hosted on your podcast. And just a bunch
amazing.
of lifelong friends, just crazy intelligent people doing really great, interesting things. And part of my responsibilities there were twofold. I had one position where I was helping a safety team, so basically a team whose job was to prevent accidental armaments of arms. So using GPS, which was still pretty nascent at the time, to ensure that a weapon didn't go off where it wasn't supposed to. And so it
Wow.
was cool. Like I didn't really want to be on a weapons design system. There was something morally about that kind of bugged me. But to be on a safety team, I think kind of helped me overcome that. And then the second project that I was working on my second year there was working with a group of physicists who were building an anti-neutrino detector. Um, I don't know the particulars, but I know antineutrinos are super small. They're really teeny. And they're really hard to detect. Most of the time, they pass through us, Earth, everything we know and love, and nobody knows because they're that tiny and they move that fast. But through the magic of some physical observations that they harnessed with the system that they built, they were able to detect at least some of them. And so, one
Wow.
thing about antineutrinos is that fissile material emits them constantly. And so, by building a portable antineutrino detector, the hope was, they could walk it through an airport or a shipyard or somewhere with a lot of cargo that would be tough to search manually. And they would notice like an uptick in the amount of antineutrinos being, passing through an area. And that would be evidence that maybe there was, fissile material there, like a nuclear bomb being snuck into the port of Baltimore, which I think is the plot of a B+ movie. And then that was cool because I was working with a bunch of scientists at the time, but I was the only engineer on the team, and so what I built was basically a system that would help count these antineutrinos. And you have to do a couple of things. You have to ignore or account for background antineutrinos. So you're just really looking for anomalous antineutrino behavior, and you also have to like present it in a way that anybody could eyeball it and be like, oh yeah, this looks like anomalous, counts. And so it was fun. It was a cool project. They sort of gave me just free reign to make it look like whatever I wanted, and we had a successful test run at the
Wow.
end that proved that yes, their system was successfully counting antineutrinos, and that we were able to show that even though there wasn't any fissile material nearby, just the natural antineutrinos in the area. They were able to show that that the expected behavior of antineutrinos was evident, and that their system worked. And by the way, I would be shocked if across all of Spotify we don't have the record for the use of the word antineutrino in a podcast. And I'm just going to go on the record and say I think that's probably the case.
Yeah, I think we won the Guinness World Record for that one. But that's really awesome, Tony. So two really interesting projects at Sandia, and then you went to Davis. You did your master's in electrical. So I want to know about that transition from UC Davis to Berkeley because it looks like you didn't even take a gap year. Like, what did that look like? Studying for the LSAT, juggling where you wanted to go to law school. How were you balancing all of that, and how did you do on the LSAT also?
Yeah, so I mean, this was back in the mid 2000s, and I don't think people took gap years back then. I was like late Gen Z, early millennial. I think the gap year hadn't been
It's a new
invented.
thing.
Yeah, and like I got engaged in 2005. We got married right after I turned in my dissertation to graduate from Davis. We took 10 days for a honeymoon right after that, and then we got back on like a Wednesday night, and law school started Thursday morning. So it was just there wasn't
Oh my
any gap. There
gosh.
was barely gap to like take a nap. So I had a nap gap, but that was about it. And like honestly, that was kind of the way we preferred it. We were like, we'd been grad students for so long. We were so poor, right? It's not like I could just go travel because we didn't have any funds to do that, right? My wife was a grad student as well. And so the two of us were basically living off her salary because master's students didn't make salaries. And so, and I knew I was going to take on this like inordinate law school debt. And so, but by the end of grad school, the only option was to just keep moving forward. I was just desperate to keep learning and keep advancing and keep trying to make progress against my goals. And so that was that. LSATs, I ended up getting, I think, a 173. It was a bummer because that year there was no 174. And so had I just
Wow.
gotten one more question right, I would have gotten a 175. Like sometimes it works out that way, but that's what it is. I
Yeah.
applied to a bunch of schools. Berkeley was closest. We actually continued to live in Davis for a couple of years after I started law school, and I just took the bus or the train into Berkeley because
Wow.
my wife was still going there, and it was just cheaper to live in Davis than to find like a middle ground. Like there's like Vacaville. There's nothing in between those two cities, and so honestly, like if you want to have any friends at all, you have to live in one or the other. And we'd already established a pretty good friend group in Davis. So that was the
Yeah.
transition. It was handing my thesis
Yeah.
on a Tuesday. Family flies into town on a Wednesday. Get married that Saturday. Honeymoon on a Sunday. Back the 2 Wednesdays after that, and law school starts the following Thursday. So it was wild.
Wow.
I was exhausted, but I was young, and young people can do this. So
Yeah, your story is just so inspiring because I didn't know how much I guess you were trying to make ends meet while you're both students, and now you're obviously a partner at one of the best firms in Silicon Valley. So it's just really impressive to see kind of where your story started.
yeah, thank you. One fun anecdote that I like to talk about is Safeway they had on sale 10 boxes of spaghetti for $1 at one point, which just seems absurd. It seems like the boxes would cost more, but we ended up buying like 50 boxes of spaghetti. And then later they had like cannellini beans in garbanzo beans, like chickpeas. They were on sale like four cans for $1, and so we ended up buying like 50 cans. And so yeah, that was like a solid 3 months of food for us, basically, with spaghetti and beans. And it was, I don't know, it was kind of fun. Like
Oh
you
my
learn to appreciate
gosh.
things like that. And I remember we would save up and like buy a bottle of mediocre wine and split it with our pasta and cannellini beans and watch the precursor to Netflix, which was DVDs. It was something that you know it was, I guess, technically digital, but it wasn't streaming. You had to load it into the player. I think most people probably don't remember
Wow.
DVDs, but they were great.
Wow, wow, wow. I love that. I mean, you basically were just eating top ramen and making things work. And it sounds like you were, really grinding, like really hard to just keep moving forward. So I want to ask you about law school now at
Yeah,
Berkeley. So
yeah.
you had 3 years after you went to Davis. I guess first, how was that commute from Davis? And how was law school compared to all of the education you did in STEM in terms of academic rigor?
Yeah, it was. So the commute was pretty rotten. It took like an hour and a half generally to get between those two places. Some days I would drive and it'd be longer or shorter depending on traffic. Excuse me. I think law school was just fun. It was just you get to learn about history and policy, and you get to kind of debate and argue and exchange ideas in a way that was really fun. And it was I mean, Berkeley's a pretty crazy place. There were at the time Professor John Yu had kind of transitioned from the Bush administration to back to a professor at Berkeley Law, and people would dress up in like orange Guantanamo jumpsuits and like storm into the class, and so you never really knew what was going to happen next. But at the same time, there's just like a lot of just really fun people, and it's sort of where law school I feel is where a lot of people find their people. Um, Networking doesn't come supernaturally to me. It takes effort, and I have to kind of motivate myself to do it. But one thing that I found is when you are around people that you like to be around, it's easy to network because it's just like being friends and hanging out. And then eventually those friends, especially the people that you meet in law school, they go on to do super interesting things, right? They start their own companies or start their own firms or join big companies as in-house counsel. And so it was a good way to sort of establish a great network of people that I really care about in like, and there's nothing worse than having to work with someone you don't like. Like it's just, it's hard. I don't think anybody on earth will disagree with that. Like, not even the most
Yeah,
like success oriented person is going to disagree that it's just harder when you don't like somebody and you have to work with them. So it was cool to be able
totally.
to like establish good friendships and just really get to know the people that I knew you could just tell when people are going to do big things. Like some people just have that sort of like, obvious potential just by talking to them. And so, um, it was cool to be able to like meet a lot of those people and to get to know a lot of those people. And generally, I think
Yeah.
people get that law school is fun. They get that you're going to meet interesting people. But I think one benefit of that, and I didn't realize it at the time. It's not like I was going around networking for the sake of building a professional network later, but just by getting to know people over the course of ordinary hanging out and chatting with them, it kind of had this like accidental effect of establishing a great network to build on. And even to this day, there's probably 10 people I talk to at least once a month from law school, people I really
Wow.
care about. So
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm surprised by that, Tony. You seem like such a people person that you're saying that networking wasn't always coming natural to you.
yeah, I'm really good at faking it. That's one thing is like I'm good at faking it. And if you ever take the personality quiz, one of the axes is extrovert or introvert. I'm like a 52% extrovert, 48% introvert. And basically what that means is I don't get the benefits of either. Like I can kind of fake it, but then I get exhausted and I have to recharge. Like I don't get energy from talking to people, but also like I don't like to be alone. So I don't know. It's a confusing place to be. But at the end of the day, I definitely need to recharge. And so after I do like, exclusively exhaustingly social things for a while, I have to take a day or two off.
That's awesome. So I want to ask about the effects of the financial crisis on your time at law school. Were you
Sure.
feeling any of those effects, especially as you graduated?
Uh, I mean, so I summered at Fenwick in 2008, and it was sort of like a stereotypical summer, right? It was like right before the effects of the financial crisis were really known. Uh, the summer was great. We there was happy hours every day. Like there was no expectation really to like put in a lot of hours. The expectation was to enjoy yourself, get to know the firm, and figure out if it's the right place for you. And that manifested in social activities, baseball games, wine tasting, oyster events, all those things. Um, by 2009, my second summer, it was very clear that it had changed. And I remember like on my first day, there was like 40 of us sitting in the kind of lobby of Fenwick. And the chairman of the firm at the time came out and he said, "Hey, we only have spots for 17 of you, but don't let that affect your summer.
Wow.
You're going to have fun." And we're just like, what? That feels like, you know, that doesn't feel that is not representative of what we're going through. And so at the time it was just like I remember thinking like this is not like last summer at all. People were working like 10, 12 hours a day. They were coming in on weekends and doing what they could to kind of stand out. And in the end, several of the people that didn't get offers initially, once the recovery had kind of started into 2010, had gotten brought back in. So it wasn't the absolute worst case scenario that it could have been, but it certainly wasn't like that first summer. Um, I remember thinking too at the time, like people just kind of seem nervous, but I sort of took a longer view and assumed things will probably work out. So, and this was right around uh, like the election in 2008 had just happened, and like Obama had just taken office in 2009, and there was still kind of a lot of like general hope and optimism. So I think as someone who didn't have like an explicit financial stake in the crisis, I probably didn't feel it the way that a lot of people who had kind of been established in the field or working for a couple of years, and especially all the people affected by layoffs had felt it. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but the answer is it wasn't front of mind for me. And I had just sort of taken a longer, more hopeful, optimistic view that things were going to be fine.
That's a great answer. And so you came back to Fenwick in September of 2010 as a patent associate. So what was your day to day like as a patent associate when you first started?
Yeah, so patent law is an interesting field because the learning curve is so steep. I mean, all of law has a steep learning curve, but patent law in particular has just like you know a, just a bunch of obviously very explicitly legal skills that you have to learn, a lot of rules and kind of its own set of uh, federal rules that you have to follow. It's got sort of an operating guide called the MPEP, which is like 700 pages long. Um, but on top of all of that,
Oh
there's soft
gosh.
skills. So there's client management. There's communications with clients. There's like how do you communicate with people you work with, and there's writing skills that are very unique to patent law. Like you wouldn't want to write. Uh, a brief to argue in front of court or a memo to a VC in the way that you write a patent application. And it is sort of changing over time. At the time, I don't know if anybody has ever seen like an old timey patent, but the language is almost like intentionally complicated and obtuse. It's like said anterior device connects to said distal end of, and like none of that is necessary. Like you can speak in plain English. And so there had been sort of like a more recent kind of transition to that style of writing in patent law. But it was still like, there were certain things you don't want to say. You don't want to limit yourself and you don't want to do any damage to the patent long term because you use poor word choice. And so and I was a decent writer at the time, but I definitely wasn't a decent, patent writer. And so it took about a solid year to learn those skills. And like with any field of law, it's just reps. You just have to get practice, get your hands dirty, and lean into it, and kind of
Yeah.
embrace the fact that it's going to be tough. And so I Fenwick leverages this apprenticeship model where you essentially sort of just like follow people, like watch them do things live, watch them talk to clients, watch them rewrite your writing or redo your claims or analyze a prior art reference live and just chat about it. And it's a very effective way. It makes you feel included. It lets you see how somebody thinks things through. I think it's a lot more effective than just getting a red line draft where someone just puts together edits and doesn't really explain why they do what they do. And because of that, I think it is an effective way to sort of learn the craft of patent law, because patent law again is just a repetition based learning experience. And so it's day to day. To get back to your original question, it really was an exercise in just practice, like getting reps at things, failing a bunch, messing a lot of stuff up. Even to this day, like a week doesn't go by where there's something I don't know how to do and I have to go find somebody or find the answer. And it's just kind of a thrilling experience to be able to tackle a learning curve that steep. And one great thing
Yeah.
is you kind of see that you're making progress on the learning curve within the first year or year and a half when people start editing your work less, right? They take a look at it and they're like, yeah, this is about what I like. Or this is about what it needs to be. Everybody's got different styles, right? There's stylistic edits versus like legally correct edits. And so, tackling both of those with the range of bosses and people that you work with is a pretty fun experience.
Sounds like a pretty steep learning curve. And you're saying it took you at least 1 to 2 years before you really felt like, okay, I know what I'm doing. And I think Fenwick's model of learning by doing is also awesome and really unique. Tony, can you talk maybe a little bit more about how did the work change from, say, year one to year three to year five? Did the types of things you're working with change, types of companies?
Not the types of companies. Most places, Fenwick included, sort of just have a trial by fire way of learning. You get thrown into the deep end right away. So if there's a really tough technology, we're engineers by trade and by practice and by background, you're expected to figure it out, right? So there are fields that are more difficult than others, but like, yeah, there's no like, oh, we're not going to give this to Tony the first year because he's just too green. From the very beginning, I was, handling, complicated machine learning type technologies or super complicated video compression algorithms. I remember going to Google and just sitting down with a team of Google engineers that were talking about YouTube's latest kind of take on the 264 standard, and just thinking like, this is really complicated. Like, I hope I'm getting this all. And then, in the end, it was fine. I did get it, but it takes a while to grind through it. And you're kind of expected to do the tough subject matter and master that pretty early on. The difference between like first, third,
Wow.
and fifth year is the amount of autonomy that you have, right? Like by your first year, like I wasn't sending emails to clients. I didn't want to say anything that was going to like upset a GC. And so, the partners or associates that were supervising me would like take a look at all the communications I send out. They would like double check every edit I made to every draft to make sure it was incorporated. By the third year, there's less of that, right? There's, hey, you want to report this out? You want to make a recommendation? You want to run the recommendation by me before you report it out? The edits were less like, as a first year, you'd get an application draft back and it would just be like bleeding red. And by the way, I took that so personally. I was like, this is my
Oh
writing.
gosh.
Like, you're murdering it. But, by the third year, it's, the supervision kind of shifts to one of like, yeah, he's probably got this section down. It's lower stakes. So we're just going to pay attention to the parts that are higher stakes, the claims or the maybe descriptions of the flow charts, that sort of thing. And then by fifth year, you're kind of on your way to running small clients. And so, when a client has a question, instead of reaching out to the partner, they reach out to you the fifth year. I don't think that's unique or maybe it's unique to Fenwick. I don't know. I heard a story about a friend of mine who was like a fourth or fifth year at the time at this firm that I won't mention, I won't name. And he said that the partner wouldn't ever let him talk to the client ever. So like the
Wow.
associate would draft an email to the partner and the partner would send it with his name on it instead of the associate's name. And on a phone call with the client, like the partner would like mute the phone, ask the associate, do you have any questions? And the associate would ask the partner, and the partner would unmute the phone and ask the question himself. There's just like that contact wasn't allowed. And I remember thinking like,
Yeah.
what? That seems like that doesn't make sense at all. Like why, that's super inefficient and that can't possibly worth the partner's time. But I don't know, maybe the partner was worried about losing the client to the associate or something. But yeah, there's nothing
Yeah.
like that. Fenwick is definitely, and again, this isn't necessarily just to talk Fenwick up. I just think there's a gradation of styles and approaches to the practice of patent law. Fenwick is like, hey, I remember as the end of my first year, a partner came to me and said, hey, the associate that's currently working on GoPro is going out on bar leave. Can you manage them? And just thinking this the first year, like, yeah, but I don't know what I'm doing, right? Like, is this okay? And he's like, you'll figure it out. Ask me if you have any questions. And so it was thrilling. It was like, here's enough rope for you to climb or hang yourself with. Like, do your best. And I was the fastest, most aggressive learning that I'd ever done because I just had to figure things out on the fly. And if I didn't know something, I'd try to go find the answer. And the answer to
Yeah.
finding the answer isn't let's go ask the partner because remember, like partners, their billing rate is really high. They've got like a ton on their plate. It was ask my contemporaries, ask other early associates, ask patent agents that have been there a while. Like, how do I do this? Where do I find the answer? Google it. Like I would Google things constantly. Like, how do I respond to this type of rejection? And it was just really
Yeah.
fun. It was fun to be able to get in and get my hands dirty with the client and then get them to trust me early because that client scaled really fast. They ended up, becoming huge at the time. And so it was really fun to like watch their success and to help them enable it with the work that we did.
I love it. Just absolutely drinking from the fire hose.
That's exactly right. Yeah. It is a torrid flow of, hey, you have to figure this out and you have to do it really quickly. So good luck. I don't know. I sort of thrive in that environment. I think maybe it's not for everybody, but it was definitely for me and it helped me.
Tony, so since we're on the topic of associate life, you've probably seen a lot of associates in your time. Like, what kind of advice can you give to associates that can really make them stand out internally? Maybe other than just doing good work, because good work is just table stakes, right? So, what kind of advice would you give to folks that are really trying to move up and stand out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the most important advice is to just treat everybody well. Like, don't assume that anybody's better than you. Don't assume you're better than anybody. Kind of appreciate that we all have roles to play on a team, but that everybody's role is important. Down and I'm talking upwards, so partners, people supervising you, uh, associates, that are your contemporaries, secretaries and paralegals who sometimes there's this like awful like hierarchy of feeling like, oh, I'm above this person. Like if you flatten out the team into a flat structure and you realize everybody's got an important role to play and we all work best when we all work together and collaboratively, that's probably the number one thing that I could say is best. And really the reason for that is because it enables this environment where we all teach each other. I've been working with the same assistant for 15 years and she is just brilliant and she's so good at what she does. And she's been working in the field for 15 years before I even got there. And so just, I think more than anybody I've learned from her. And just because she knows the ins and outs of the patent office and she's seen the evolution of how they handle things over time. And her instinct is
Wow.
really, really good on things. So like she can usually just figure out what's the patent office is going to do based on sort of the facts of the matter that we're looking at. And it also like means that when you're on a flattened hierarchy type team where you're all collaborating, that you have to pay that forward, right? There's this obligation if you take advantage of someone else's knowledge to pass that forward. And so it sort of motivates me, at least as the individual, and I hope other people as well, to take the time and invest in other people around you, right? Invest in the junior people coming up because eventually they're going to be the ones that you're going to rely on most when you bring in a big client. And so yeah, I would say treat everybody with respect, and it's not just people on the professional team. It's everybody. Like your facilities team, your security team, IT. Just be kind. That's sort of common sense. I feel like that's a cop out answer. So here's a better answer. I think the other thing that I would really recommend is, uh, you know, don't be afraid to just dive in on something that you don't feel comfortable with. Like just get uncomfortable frequently and figure out how to make yourself comfortable with it. And by that, I mean, like, if there's a case, if there's a litigation going on, a new litigation that comes in and is going on in the subject matter that you just don't know anything about, like figure it out. Like jump on Wikipedia and educate yourself. Figure out the basics so that you're at least competent to talk about it. If there's a new type of procedure that comes up, and this actually happens pretty frequently. A good example is the PTAB appeals process is a pretty new thing in patent law within the last 10 years. Like nobody knew how it was going to work, and people just had to jump in, and those people have had wild success with it. So, just don't be afraid to tackle something that's outside of your comfort zone. Um, that also feels like a cop out answer, though, if I'm being honest with myself.
No, this is great advice. I think for a lot of people, they've been in an academic setting their whole lives, and so you're placed in this environment where you're forced to seek discomfort, and that may not be, I guess, common sense for a lot of folks because they're used to being told what to do. I've been in the workforce for 7 years in a sales as an account executive. So for me, like I have to get uncomfortable and do those types of things. But I feel like for a lot of folks that are KJDs or maybe haven't, worked anything other than internships, maybe that's not so commonsensical.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think maybe it isn't obvious to other people. I think it's obvious only in retrospect. I don't think I really realized it at the time. Um, I actually do have one more thing, though, that I think is
Sure.
not a cop out. And that's, I really think there's a tendency, especially among people our age and a little younger, to delay other parts of their life for professional success. And, I think that's okay to some extent, but like, the best things in my life aren't work related. It's just that I have like an awesome wife who's brilliant and just amazing and is, I'd rather spend time with her than anything else. And then, we started a family and we have amazing kids and they're so funny and fun and loud and just, uh, it's just like thrilling to watch them to grow up and see how they develop and learn. And I look around at some of the people in the generation before me who delayed a lot of those decisions, and especially with biological processes, sometimes those decisions are made for you if you delay too long. So I think jumping in, don't be afraid to take advantage of your parental leaves at your firms. Don't be afraid to start families. Don't be afraid to like, I mean, it's hard. It's not easy at all to balance these things, but don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help from other people that have had success. And it really enabled me, I think, to kind of embrace this sort of like chaotic, multifaceted work and professional and personal life that I balance, that I've has been tough to it's been tough to find, but it is possible to find it. And I think that's probably, I mean, I would trade my professional life for my family life in a second. I wouldn't do it the other way around. So I think, being able to like do both is the right move. And just don't put things off forever, I guess is what I would say. Like, don't be afraid to
Yeah.
jump in and start now. Like, it's going to be hard, but you're going to be fine.
Love that advice. Yeah, I think it's super important. And the first time we spoke too, you always, spoke really highly about your family and your wife. And I saw on LinkedIn, you shared your wife's YouTube videos. So that was really awesome to see how much you value that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she's the brains of the family, and like, she's really, really good at explaining things. So that was a no brainer.
That's awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk about sort of the later years. So you were a patent
Sure.
associate for just over 10 years at Fenwick. So what did
Yeah.
things look like as you started to get closer to, going for partnership? I know when we first spoke, you said it's a little more rare to see an IP partner. So I'd love to understand like what were some of the challenges with that and, how can you set yourself up as an associate to go for the partnership?
Yeah, I don't. So I don't recall saying that. I don't think it is more rare to make partner in IP. I think that over time, and I think this goes for Fenwick and across the legal industry generally, the expectation for partnership has transitioned from being really good at what you do, just being an awesome lawyer, to being really good at what you do and have a strong fundamental business case to support your partnership. And that transition sort of, I think, I haven't really seen it written anywhere, but I think it's something that's more or less universally acknowledged now that having business development acumen and like a proven track record of success, whatever extent that may be, is helpful, and it's probably required to make partner at most big law top 100 firms now. It's not the case for other fields necessarily, right? Like you can be just a total badass patent litigator and just be really good at it and have absolutely no biz dev and not have any expectation at all to have any biz dev chops or at least experience with it. If you're really good at what you do, because there's cases to be argued and be litigated, and they need good partners in that position, and so it is field dependent. I think for IP specifically, though, kind of like corporate startup law, I think is sort of the another analogous one. There is sort of this expectation that over time you're going to be a business development machine, or at least have a strong biz dev base for your partnership case that has manifested up until then. So it takes 3-4 years to build that, but then is also going to continue to grow. And so I think sophisticated partnerships are able to sort of like suss out, hey, yeah, this person has shown they're not just a one trick pony. They don't just have like one client that brings in a lot of bacon, and they're at risk at losing that one client, and then they don't have any business development base. Instead, like this person has a series of business development successes, whatever that may look like. It's not necessarily just a lot of dollars, but maybe it's like a lot of potential. Maybe it's like a couple clients right on the cusp of breaking out huge. Maybe it's like super tight integration with a couple of like VCs or business networks that have lots of potential for future success. But generally, I think yes, in IP, the expectation is that you are going to show some acumen in biz dev skill sets, and the thing I want to say about that is it takes time to do that. You can't just like wake up one day and be like, okay, today I start becoming, a biz dev machine. You have to say, okay, today I do that, and it's going to take 5 years, because these successes that you have sometimes are the results of years of effort. I remember one time I had lunch with somebody, and then like a year and a half later, this person, she told me that she was an associate Fenwick. She was leaving the firm and joining this startup at the time, and I said, cool. So I had lunch with her before she left. And then like a year after that, she called me up and she said, hey, we're thinking about starting a patent program. What do you think? And I kind of told her what I thought. Like I said, yeah, I think it makes sense for, a company in your position. Here's how I would approach it. And like 9 months after that, she said, okay, we're ready. So you're looking at like a solid 2 or 3
Wow.
years of lead time. But it took like a couple of lunches with the person that I liked talking to and like being around, and then some like intervening like just touch points, like, hey, how are you doing? Is there anything you need? Yeah. I remember a couple of times she needed some decks that I was able to just send over based on things we previously prepared. She needed a connection to somebody in like at an accounting firm, so I just connected her with that person, and so it's just sometimes the tail of your biz dev investment is very long. And so because of that, it's something you have to be very strategic and deliberate about and plan early on. Like I don't see any reason at all why you can't start your business development efforts as a first or second year. Other than I do think that time probably should be best spent, learning the craft itself and making sure the field's for you. But apart from that, like it doesn't mean you can't network and just be in touch and like be friends and check in on people you care about that are also in your professional network. And so yeah, it is sort of a weirder path, I think, than it used to be. I think there is consensus that it is the case that you do need business development, a track record of success, and then just acknowledgement that it takes time to do that. Like being a great lawyer almost isn't enough now, at least in some fields, and I think patent law is one of them. I think you also just have to show that you're capable of being, you've got a strong business case to make partner in the first place.
I'd love to ask you now about like what does the day-to-day look like as an IP partner, and also curious what types of companies are you working with on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So let's take that second question first because I like it. Well, I like your first question too, but I want to answer the second one first. So in about 2015, I started really investing a lot of my time into robotics companies, and because robotics is so related to the fields of like machine vision and autonomous vehicle behavior, I really started investing in AI in about 2015, 2016. and remember, this is long before ChatGPT, was broke onto the scene. It was just kind of in the early days of neural network development, commercial neural network development. So before you could really like take an off the shelf neural net and train it to do something, it was sort of in the early days of developing those initial models. And I just put a ton of time into it. And over time, I have sort of transitioned from like an electronics IoT consumer device specialist in the like mid 2010s to doing almost exclusively AI. So, and not just AI in the sense of, not just generative AI. I'm talking about like AI and all the ancillary verticals related to it. So again, robotics and in autonomous vehicle control, but also like big data analytics and also bioinformatics. So, drug discovery and diagnostics using AI. Sometimes this goes back to my question about like, hey, what are you comfortable with learning? Like, I'm not a biochemist, right? This is not my background, but I was able to learn enough of the fundamentals of the field that I could apply what I did know, which was AI in kind of complicated, complex machine learned models to sequence data, which is just like any other data. You can, a model can find a pattern in sequence data the same way I could find it in image data or any other type of data that can be digitized. And so we had a good buddy of mine who was at Fenwick and was sort of the specialist in bioinformatics, took an in-house position, and it was up to me to learn it. So I just started going to Wikipedia. And again, my wife is a biochemist, so I bugged her constantly, like, what does this word mean? Like, how does this, what is this principle? How does it work? And so, yeah, almost everything I do is analytic or AI related, or sorry, artificial intelligence or AI related. And so that's been a fun kind of transition, and also timed really great. It's almost the only thing in my life that I timed well. Is the fact that I invested early in AI, and I sort of became a go-to AI attorney. Day to day, the
Wow.
partnership is sort of like being an associate. You know, it's more managerial. There's more admin, but at the end of the day, it's about connecting with clients, figuring out how can we best serve these clients, and making them feel good about it, making them feel like it was money well spent to engage with us. And so, I've got a team of maybe 10 people that I really rely on day to day. I'm in touch with all of them constantly. We just want to put the best possible legal work product out there. My goal at the end of the day, I want a client to feel, I want them to say thank you when they pay an invoice, right? Like hey, not like, yeah, we know that legal help is expensive, but your work product is so good and you made our life so easy that thank you. Like, this was worth it. And to me, that's just the pinnacle of success in the field, is knowing that you've helped make somebody's life easier. Yeah, sorry, that was
Yeah.
a rambling answer. Hopefully I hit both of your points there.
No, it's awesome. So it sounds like you really prioritize quality over anything else.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Sometimes that's not the ask. Sometimes the ask is, we need this really fast. Like, we've got a project launching Friday, let's get it out. Then it's like, how much quality can you pack into one day? But yeah, for the most
Yeah.
part, just doing quality work, just work that stands on its own. This happens all the time, but we inbound work from other lawyers and other firms, and when you see it, you're just like, oh, how could they do this? Like, this is not in good shape, and it's more expensive to fix these things, if you can fix them at all, because sometimes you can't. Sometimes that ship has sailed. But
Yeah.
I just always think like, ooh, if somebody else takes this over, I want them to look at this and be like, wow, I've got big shoes to fill. Like, I'm gonna have to really live up to this high standard. And so
Yeah.
that's a big motivator and driver for me.
Yeah, I'd love to double click on that, and then maybe we can wrap by. I want to just open it up to you to share anything that you can with people who are looking to get into IP law early on. But want to just double click on small companies, working with small companies and like really small startups versus big companies. It sounds like, I mean, I would assume that smaller companies prioritize speed maybe a little bit more versus the larger companies. So could you talk about what those differences are working with the early stage startups versus maybe the Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 companies?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of differences, but from an IP attorney's perspective, the biggest difference is that big companies have big legal departments. And when you have a big legal department, what that means is that you've got maybe a complicated set of procedures. You've got not just the attorney you're working for, but that attorney's boss. You've got a legal ops team that you've got to keep happy. I mean, it's great. It's great work. It's exciting work because, big companies often like have the resources to put into really interesting projects. But it is like more complicated from like a client management perspective. That's not a complaint. It's fine. It's just sort of the nature of it. When you're working with a startup, they probably don't have an attorney, or if they do, they may have just one attorney, and it's probably not an IP attorney. And so it's sort of exciting because you get to play the role of in-house counsel for that company. They're sort of outsourcing that role to you, and I always think it's a sign of success if a company can grow to a point way past when they should have hired an IP attorney, but they don't have to because you do such a good job for them. That's a really exciting
Wow.
thing, and that's kind of the sweet spot. That's where we shine, right? That's where we say like, hey, not only are you not having to pay a salary, an in-house attorney, you can put that money better spent elsewhere, and you can rely on us and know that we're going to do as good of a job as maybe an in-house person might be able to do. And so that's the feeling that I try to instill in the smaller companies that grow into bigger companies that I work with.
That's awesome. And I saw you worked with some YC companies too in your time, which is really cool to see.
Yeah,
But
tons of good YC work. Not just YC, all like basically every incubator. They're just engineered to like recruit interesting companies and impart them with great wisdom and get them on the way. There's some really really interesting things going on, and all sort the runway incubators doing amazing stuff. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's a fun time to be in tech because there's so many resources to new companies and so many people with great ideas. I'm not going to say it's the best time ever to start a company, but I think you could do worse. And I also think that like for a company that just doesn't know what they're doing, there's a ton of resources out there to kind of point you in the right direction. So it's fun to see that. It's fun to see that these companies have a great fighting chance at making it and raising huge amounts of money and just changing the world with their ideas.
cool, Tony. Well, you're really inspiring. I loved learning about you, and obviously, you really enjoy working at Fenwick. I'll just wrap by asking you, is there anything else you want to share looking back on your career? Anything anecdotal you want to share with folks that are either just trying to go into law or maybe even trying to go into IP law? What are some things that you maybe want to share with your younger self?
Sometimes I think I wasn't patient enough. I think if I could go back and tell my younger self, like, just be patient. Sometimes I think that I don't have much of an ego, but I do think that I let my ego get in the way sometimes of good learning opportunities. Um, on reflection, I think I was able to kind of separate the wisdom that came from that. But I think that I kind of chalk that up to being young. Um, I think I would just, if I could tell people one thing, I think it was just like, don't be afraid to work hard. Like, good things come from really, diving in and putting a ton of effort into something. Um, it's that sort of just, I think that just sounds like that advice. I think probably comes off as cheesier than I mean it, but it's something that like I don't regret doing. I think I really succeeded. I found a lot of success from hard work. Um, and sort of related to that is when you work hard, you also fail a lot. Like it doesn't mean you're not going to fail. So don't be afraid to fail and like learn from that. Um, I hated failing. I hated losing things, but I really, really learned and got better from it. And so I took those experiences and I was very introspective about like, well, what do we learn from this, right? Like what is the takeaway? What is the lesson? And that helped me kind of when I did drop something or not succeed in a way. And I'm not just talking about life or about law. I'm talking about just like life generally. When I didn't succeed at something, just being introspective about like why and trying to figure out how I can adapt and change. That was useful. And then the other thing I was going to say is the exact opposite, which is don't be afraid to chill. Sometimes just like go to the beach, go on hikes, get out and exercise. Like drink a glass of wine and read a book, join a book club. Those things are, I don't know. I just without those, without just saying, "Hey, let's go out to dinner. Let's bring the kids out to dinner," even though it's like just a Tuesday. There's no reason to celebrate. Let's go on a hike or let's go jump in the pool. Like those things are as valuable as working hard and learning from that. So, yeah, those are my two absolutely contradictory answers that are both super important to me
Love it.
personally, and hopefully they help out other people kind of frame how they approaching law, approaching a career in law, taking the LSAT, going to law school, and climbing
Yeah.
the ladder.
It's amazing. No, I think a lot of these things are, you could think of as, I guess, common sense, but it's a great reminder. And I think you're sharing your story has really just kind of been really great to hear about the things you value, which is like working hard and failing often, and ultimately putting out a good quality work product above anything else. And like you, last thing you said was just chilling out, which is also important. But yeah, this was a great episode, Tony. I really enjoyed learning about you, and thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for putting up with me. This was fun. I'm excited to see how it turns out.